AI can make sense of structured data. I don't know how many plant managers understand what JSON is, JSON format. So it's probably a whole different topic for another podcast session. But when you have structured data that says in this plant, and I'll give you the perfect example from Prove It conference, because this was aligned with ISA 95 standard, and we're saying that everything in terms of the rules of how the data is organized in the unified namespace follows this standard. So the nodes where we see things, they start with enterprise. So think of it, whichever company you are working with. In some cases, you might publish 2 different companies or 3 different companies into your UNS. Then after that, you have site, and site might be your production plant. And in the case of Prove It conference, we had enterprise, and then Dallas was the name of the site for that virtual factory. Then you have area, line, and cell, right? So those enterprise, site, area, line, cell, those are the standard categories through which you're going to drill down into the information that's relevant to you. And it's now a commonplace assumption that when you organize your unified namespace, you're going to follow that standard, that you're going to do it that way. And so it's geography. And then within the geography, whichever site that is, you're talking about the area within the site, and the production line, and the cell might be a specific machine. So that's how the data would be organized. So while there is no specific standard for unified namespace yet, there are actually people working on developing one. But when we say that the data is going to be collected and published there are best practices to follow. And so this is where I get back to, if you hire the right partner to help you along this journey, you're going to be okay. Because people didn't come up with this idea overnight. So there are best practices to do this, right? And so if the people that are making this data available from your systems into the unified namespace follow these guidelines, then it's already going to be organized a certain way that lends itself nicely to AI understanding, and most importantly, to your own people's understanding of where to look for everything. There is guidance on the different levels of the hierarchy, where you stick stuff. So when that happens, you can still say that different companies have different levels of flexibility, and they may stick things at the deeper levels, one way here and another way there. Yes, we see some of that because that approach is relatively new to people. And it could be that you had a one project team going in and doing things a certain way over here, printing presses at the factory, for example, and then another project team doing something. And so, yes, you might see some discrepancies in organization at the deeper levels, but this is where the structure comes in to help out. So if they followed the initial path of how we're going with this company, this business, to this specific site, to this production line, this cell, whatever that area was in, now your AI will be able to make sense of that. So it takes not just AI's capability to understand structured data, but also your integrators' thinking to make sure that they follow the best practices when they organize it. And yes, then you'll be able to say, whenever it's put in there, with one more caveat, as long as the names of the tags, and tags would be your data points, your control points that are in this broker that has the unified namespace. As long as those tags are not named in such a way that any random person from the street would understand what that is, then AI can definitely understand it. If they're named cryptically, which also happens a lot of times, maybe it's for the sake of efficiency, Then you also need to maintain the data dictionary. So that was our fifth point, saying how do manufacturers prepare for this? You prepare by providing the missing documentation and by creating the data dictionary for all the terms that you use, so that you can take that new employee and give it to them and say, here's everything we ever talk about, this is what it means. Now, if that new employee understands that, great. Now let's take that and give it to the AI. As long as the terms used are explained somewhere, then this path of how we got to it hierarchically, as long as it follows those best practices, that will be understood. And so with the different chatbots, you will be left with which chatbot is more efficient, which chatbot is less efficient, because the trick of the trade is how do you get that huge amount of data that comes in real time from all the different sensors at the company, and how do you narrow it down so that when you interact with large language models and ask them questions, you are not overwhelming them with all that you could send. Because if you do that, you're going to get inaccurate answers. So the trick here is finding the best way to compress and reduce scope, and then you take what you got, send it, and you get meaningful answers. Just like with people, by the way. If I had to take all that data that just came in from the telemetry, and instead of sending it to the large language model, I would give it to a Bob operator or supervisor at the factory and say, can you tell me based on this, what's wrong? If I give them too much, it will take them forever because they'll be afraid. They'll think that there's some kind of trick in this and they'll have to scan all that data. But if I filter it just to what's relevant, then they'll have much easier time finding the response. It's the same with AI, exactly the same. So they have to prepare for this by looking at what today is tribal knowledge in the heads of their operators, in the heads of their supervisors, in the heads of their production planners, in the heads of their QC managers. Get that tribal knowledge written in a digital format where we can then take those documents, give it to the AI. So that's number one. And then number two is all the terminology that you have, the AI needs to know what it is. Once you have those two, you're good to go with the unified namespace that can be understood by the AI, and your OEE will improve. Your right first time will improve. Your on time and in full metric will improve. All of that will improve. You just have to get going with it.